Building a TMF metrics program from nothing can be a daunting task for many TMF teams. Without effective measurement of TMF metrics, it's difficult to identify and address gaps in your process that contribute to inspection readiness issues. But where do you start? In this episode of the State of TMF, we'll explore the steps you need to take to build a TMF metrics program from scratch, learning how to define KPIs, collect and analyze data, and assign responsibility. So whether you're just getting started with TMF metrics or looking to optimize your existing program, you won't want to miss this episode. The State of TMF is officially in session. Let's get into it.
Now, Donatella, I know when it comes to metrics, I know that there's a favorite quote that you have that you share with every customer from someone that I think everyone will know. Walk us through that kind of famous quote that you hold near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. I think that, when we do this training on metrics with our customer, because training is one of the topics of our TMF maturity packages, because it's a very important topic when it comes to TMF management. Definitely, this is a quote that, let's say, incorporate the meaning of the implementation of metrics in your TMF process. So we're going to see during this slides that there are lots of things that you can measure in your TMF. Metrics are almost everywhere. Your TMF is not just a collection of documents, but you will see it as a repository of important data and very useful data. But because they are a lot, you need to identify what are very useful for your business, what are useful for your process, and if you see that you are not improving anything, stop looking at them, because it means that you didn't develop the right goals, the right objective. So it's really a very important step in the process to identify what metrics apply to your TMF process. So we will see during next slides what I'm referring to, but definitely because inside the TMF, there are lots of data. Focus only on those that really matters, that really makes a difference, that really makes your process improved and more inspection ready.
I love it. So, and just for those that are listening, so the quote is actually from Mark Twain. If the metrics you are looking at aren't useful in optimizing your strategy, stop looking at them. And I think that is going to be kind of a key theme as we go through today's discussion, all around how to build a metrics program, but they've got to be meaningful. They've got to be useful in helping you make better decisions and improving your overall strategy. So I know that both of us love talking about metrics, Donatella. So,
I don't know why I think that we know what metrics are basically, but I think that it would be important, first of all, to define why are TMF metrics important. So Oliver, in your opinion and by your experience, why are the main reasons that makes TMF metrics so important in the process?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So when it comes to metrics, I think, like the quote says, it's important to think about what you're trying to achieve, right? So when we think about metrics, I like to think about each of the individual letters in the word metrics. So M, which is measure where you are. So you got to think about what is your current state of affairs? What's the benchmark that you want to set to be able to understand that starting point? Because you got to know where you are before you figure out where you're going. The next is evaluate inspection readiness. They can be a really useful tool in the world of TMF to understand how ready you are for a specific inspection. Now, obviously, we've got the three core metrics that everybody focuses on, but there are other metrics that can help us understand how ready we are for an inspection. Then I think we've got to think about how we can identify trends sooner rather than later. Are there things that we can see within the data itself that enable us to understand what potential issues we have today or that we might have in the future? So I think that's also really, really important. I think also we have to, metrics give us a really great understanding of what our current reality is. I think so many of us who, especially for those of us that have been in the space for a really, really long time, will have a natural inclination to see something and then kind of rely on their instinct or their gut feeling. And some of the time, if you've got a ton of experience, that gut feeling can carry you quite far. But metrics are going to be able to tell you a much more concrete and complete story that's going to help you make better decisions. I think also Metrics are important because they help you identify issues and areas that you should be focusing on versus other areas that maybe aren't important. And that can sometimes pull into that gut feeling. Maybe you don't need to be focusing on the metrics that you think you should be, but there's some information that you've been able to gather that help you say, maybe I should be focusing in a different area. I think it also allows us to check compliance with the TMF plan. If we've defined what our sort of process is, how we want our teams to work, how we want the process ultimately to unfold, it allows us to use metrics to verify whether we are complying with what we've set out to do. And then I think metrics, as always, are a really great way to share team successes. So if there are things where we've seen metrics improve over time, or if there's certain metrics that were lagging and are now improving, we have to, we can use those metrics to celebrate those successes with the team. One of the things that I think is really important, and I think everybody agrees that metrics are important to TMF teams, but Donatella, what are some of the reasons, or how can metrics help us answer key questions about our TMF process or model?
Yeah, absolutely. Oliver, I love this list, definitely, because I think that here in the list, there are the key messages for why we are using TMF metrics and why they are so important. So it's necessary to implement the metrics in our TMF process because they can answer a relevant question about around our TMF process. If you want to know the answer about, for example, if you are in compliance with your SOP, if you are in deviation, if you are in compliance with the regulatory requirement, that we know that there are lots of regulatory requirements in the TMF environment, if you are in compliance with your plan, with your protocol. So you really need to have this data, this measurement, to help you to understand the status. And as you said, the status is relevant to understand to support the improvement, because without knowing the level that you are now managing, you can't improve. You can't identify where to focus your resources, where you focus your strategy. So it's really important to know this data, to know this information, to develop the right strategy and the right plan. Always with the goal of inspection readiness, because I think that at the end of the day, we all want to be inspection ready with our TMF. So TMF metrics can really answer the question, are you inspection ready? So definitely they are very important, and there can be a lot of questions they can answer to give you an idea of what you are living in terms of TMF process and how you can improve it, where to focus the strategy for your improvement. But I don't think, I think that we did a very good introduction in terms of what metrics are, why they are so important. And I think that all the people in this virtual room agree that metrics are important for a good and a proper TMF management. But things not always go in the right way. We don't live in a perfect world. So Oliver, why and where do you think that metrics go wrong? Where do you think that people don't implement the right metrics in their process? What's go wrong? Can go wrong by your experience?
Yeah, I think like anything that you're trying to improve, it's really, really easy to take too much time in planning and too much time in sort of focusing on the wrong things. So one of the first things I see where people go wrong with metrics is focusing on too many metrics. So when you think about defining your metric strategy, it's important to focus on the metrics that truly matter to achieving your goal. So trying to track too many metrics can be like overwhelming for the team. It can make it difficult to identify what's really important. And ultimately, it's better to focus on a few key metrics that are closely aligned with maybe your business objectives than it is to try and focus on every single metric. I think the other thing is sometimes we tend to neglect, defining the purpose for metrics. We just say, oh, let's track everything. Before defining what metrics you want to track, it's important to understand what you want to achieve and why you want to achieve it, and then think about the metrics that are going to help give you that insight to improving those different goals or objectives that you're looking at. I think the other kind of focus that kind of ties into that is not measuring the right thing. So sometimes we start to think about things that maybe someone else has said, oh, maybe we should track this, or maybe we should track that. But sometimes we might start, developing a program where we're measuring things that actually don't have an impact or don't help us make better decisions. I think sometimes there's also a consideration for limitation of metrics. Are we not using the right tool set? Do we not have tools that help collate and collect that information so that we can get the right metrics? If we go out there and build a metrics plan, but we can't actually implement it, well, that's a ton of wasted time. And then I think finally, one of the things that I see over and over and over again is to communicate internally what the strategy is for metrics. Your metric strategy should be communicated as clearly as you can to everybody that's going to be impacted by those metrics or contributes to those metrics, and help them understand what is being measured and why it's being measured. So I think those are some of the things where I see this, where people go wrong with metrics. The big one for me is often focusing on too many metrics. And we talk a lot about, here at Munchkin, building a roadmap.
Absolutely.
Right, Donatella?
Exactly. Yeah, if I can add an example for, there was this customer, we had a training with them, and, the funny thing is that they implemented 21 metrics for the TMF management process based on the TMF reference model, because if you go on the webpage, there are these, suggestion of the list of metrics that you can implement in TMF. And they implemented everything, just saying, okay, they will help us to be inspection ready, to be more in compliance. Can you imagine what does it mean to manage 21 metrics? How to measure all these metrics on a regular basis, how to check the result, define the action for each result. I mean, it's not feasible. I mean, you really need to focus on what is the priority for you, what makes the difference in your process, and maybe you can have a different approach and a step approach, so you can maybe this year focus on the timeliness and the next year on the quality. So don't think that just measure everything will solve the issue and will make you inspection ready, because you will fail. I mean, it's impossible. You really need, as Oliver said, focus on what is really important, what can make the difference, and what can make you improve in your TMF process. So the first step in this process to define the goals and the metrics is really important. Exactly. This is what I was telling you. I think that the very first step in this process of metrics implementation is to define the goals and the objective, reminding always that there's no the rule one size fits all. So don't copy and paste a matrix developed by someone else, developed by a best practice or another company, because you need to understand, based on your company need, based on your company model, on your TMF processes, on your resources, what are the best metrics to measure? What are the best metrics that can really make the difference, can really help me to improve my process, and do a step-by-step process. So identify the goals that you want to achieve. It can be implement a better quality check, obviously. Again, the very first goal is inspection readiness, but that means completeness, quality, timeliness. So define what is the goal, the granularity goal inside the inspection readiness. You want to achieve more oversight, maybe you want to have better performances from your CRO, from the vendors, or for your internal team. Define your goals, and then identify the metrics that can help you to support those goals. And a very, let's say, common and general suggestion and approach is ensure that these objectives are SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So first step, define the goals that you want to achieve and identify the metrics that can support you and lead to achieve those goals.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think that there's some, starting by identifying what objectives you have or the goals that you're trying to achieve is obviously the foundation. Once you've understood that this is where you want to be, now you need to figure out, well, where are we now? So you start to think about what are the metrics that we need to create that are tied to these specific goals or begin to measure. And then from there, understand what that kind of initial benchmark might be. So if we go back to sort of our metrics program implementation process, the first step being set goals and objectives. And then now we move on to identifying your metrics of focus. Now, when it comes to metrics, I think most on the line and most people listening to this will have heard of the kind of trifecta of TMF metrics: quality, completeness, and timeliness. But Donatella, there are some other metrics that we might want to consider, and even maybe some metrics within quality, completeness, and timeliness that are a little bit more granular. Maybe you could explore that for us for a second.
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, I think that all the people that are online today know that quality, completeness, and timeliness are the three main pillars to ensure the inspection readiness, that they are what an inspector wants to see in our TMF. We all agree on that. But these are the macro area. These are the macro, the group under which there are a subgroup of metrics of data. Because what does it mean, quality? Quality can be, how many, the percentage of duplicates in my TMF. It can be the different quality issue. So, for example, signature missing, date missing, duplicates, wrong metadata that I've got in my TMF. So, for quality, there is a lot of aspects that you can measure. Same for completeness and timeliness. It's not just a matter of verify, if all the pieces of the story are there. You can also verify if they have been uploaded in the right time, in the right way, following your processes, because obviously inspectors are not waiting for having uploaded everything the day before the inspection. So everything must be uploaded in a timely manner. So you can, measure the time that you create a document, develop the document, and upload the document to the TMF. Because I saw, believe me, people that create a document today, let's say April, but it is uploaded and you see in the TMF even 6 months later. That is not, upload and manage your TMF in a timely manner. Completeness, you need to understand if based on your index, if based on the placeholder that you have put, if based on your milestone or event, you are filling in a complete way your TMF. So as you said, there are lots of granularity to understand inside these three main pillars, but they are not the only metrics that you can measure. You put here administrative, system use, and volume metrics. These are, let's say, not less known, but maybe less common, less used, but very useful metric as well. Let's think about the volume. So how many documents or how many pages of documents are you managing your TMF? It can be important to measure this kind of data, because you need to maybe know this data for a vendor to have a proposal. You need to maybe understand the volume of documentation managed by your team, so understand some statistic aspect. So that can be measured inside the TMF, and that can be, fitting for purpose based on your need. System use, you can understand if, for example, one person with the access never access to TMF. So you can ask your question, okay, why this person has an access to the TMF but never access to the system, or another one always access to the system without having the proper permission or the proper reason to access to the system. So there are lots of data that you can capture, analyze, and define what to do. Administrative also, who is the ownership of the TMF, who is going to do the administrative task inside the TMF. So these are aspects related to the model of your TMF process that can really help you to improve your organization, your resources administration, and your model in terms of TMF management. So don't, let's say, limit yourself to quality, completeness, timeliness. Definitely, these are the main 3 metrics, we know and we all agree, but there are also other metrics that you can use that can be very helpful. So always keep in mind that TMF has also this information inside of it.
And I think you touched on something that was really interesting there, specifically around volume, right? So today we focus a lot on what's the timeliness of documentation. How timely are we at filing? How complete is the TMF based on what we've defined? But when we think about trying to scale, and I was having a conversation earlier this morning about how do we scale from where we are today in the future? How do we plan for that scale? And so using things like volume metrics to understand, well, how many documents can this type of resource process, QC, index, whatever the task might be within a given time period. That's going to help us understand if we anticipate a higher volume, maybe we're starting a larger study or we're expanding our study, whatever it might be. We want to understand what can we do with our current team and what do we need to do in terms of growing our team to be able to support that additional volume. Without looking at those types of metrics, we're going to be guessing, right?
Yeah,
and I think that's really important. I think system use, again, is also, like you mentioned, Donatella, very, very interesting, because if you've got, let's say, a key stakeholder that maybe in your SOP is defined as someone that is performing a certain action in the TMF, but again, you see that individual logs in infrequently, well, that is a huge flag to an inspector that maybe the process isn't being followed. And so some of these sort of shadow metrics or side metrics that most people maybe don't consider can be really useful in understanding some of those gaps that you might uncover or an inspector might uncover in an inspection. If you only focus on quality, completeness, and timeliness, and don't think about some of the other areas, you might find yourself coming up against some friction as you go through an audit or inspect the TMF itself. Perfect. So what I'd love to do now is move on to kind of the next step in the process. So we've set our goals and objectives. We've talked about what we're trying to achieve. We've mapped the metrics that we want to track to the objectives that we're trying to achieve. Now we need to think about who's going to be involved in that process, right, Donatella? When we think about defining responsibility and accountability, what are some of the things that you typically kind of recommend to customers in this area?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very critical step, and it's the most challenging one, I would say, talking with customer, because is the answer to the question, okay, who is doing what? So basically, okay, we all agree that metrics are important. Maybe we develop the right list of metrics, we define the right goals. Now someone needs to be responsible, for capturing the metrics, for capturing this data, and to document them and to share this outcome. So defining who is responsible for this kind of activity in the process is really crucial, because otherwise, you will have a process and it will be challenging to define from whom the final deliverable of the matrix needs to come. So it's really important. And for example, we suggest to develop a RAC table for doing this kind of identification and assignment of responsibility in the TMF plan, because majority of the time you use matrix in the majority of the scenario that I've seen, they are shared with the CRO. So basically you've got the sponsor and the CRO, And metrics is part of this relationship, let's say. So it's very important to understand who is going, to check the metrics result in this process, in this relationship, and what's the consequences, what's the next step based on the outcome. So define the TMF plan. Who is responsible for measuring the metrics and defining who is accountable, informed, consulting for anything metrics related is really crucial, because otherwise, a very important step of the process is missing. So our suggestion, and we see last year that it worked very well, was define in the RACI table inside the TMF plan the list of activities related to the metrics program, defining who is responsible. And even if you are not working with a CRO and you're doing everything internally, it's important to clarify even internally who is responsible for doing that, because it can be the CTA or the CPM or a TMF lead. So it depends really on your model, on your organization, but define the accountability, responsibility, fundamental, definitely.
And is there any sort of good examples online, for sort of developing that RACI table? Is that something that you typically provide to our customers? Where can someone kind of dig out some best practices on developing a RACI table?
We've got our TMF plan template where there is a RACI table. I mean, definitely, it's part of our training packages, defining the role responsibility inside the TMF process. So it's part of our workshop to define a RACI table for the TMF management. So if you're having a look, in internet, you will definitely understand what a RACI table is, but you need to customize this table to your TMF process. It's an effort. I'm going to tell you by my experience and by the experience of our customer that it's a very effort, because a RACI table, if well written, is long, detailed, it can be confusing a little bit at the beginning, but with timing, it really helps to improve your process. You will see the benefit of having this RACI table, because apart from the, let's say, scary moment of the beginning where you see this table with the R, A, C, I, and you don't understand what you really need to do, people then become familiar and they really are more able to understand, okay, there is a deliverable expecting from me, or there is not. I need just to be informed, so I need to be involved in some discussion, in some topic. So it's really an helpful tool, and especially when there are, lots of vendors, lots of CRO, because we used to, last year we had a customer that it was a sponsor working with something like 5-6 CRO in the same clinical trial. So you can imagine that managing the TMF and metrics in that kind of scenario can be really challenging if you don't, clarify what is expected from, all these stakeholders and what are the responsibility, accountability, and all the stuff among all these stakeholders. So developer, I know that it's an effort. We used to support our customer in doing this kind of implementation, but you will see the benefit, absolutely.
And are there sort of areas where you see people sort of or places where people go wrong when it comes to sort of RACI tables and things like that? What are some of the things? Because like you said, there's probably, especially when you're coming into sort of a complex environment with multiple stakeholders, multiple organizations, what are some of the things that you see where you kind of recommend to avoid when it comes to RACI tables? Is it something like assigning too many things to one person, or what do you see?
Yes, keep it, the best practice that we suggest is keep it simple as much as possible. If a person, what I saw with some of our customers was that when they implemented the RACI table before, getting in touch with us, it was that they used to put all the RACI letters for every stakeholder of the process. So the CTA, CPM, let's say TMF lead, head of clinical operations, statistician, data manager. I mean, it's not necessary to put a letter in each for each of these persons. So really define who is in charge of the final deliverable in the process, who are the expectation as an outcome from the process, and so develop the process as much easy as possible. And don't forget to train and agree on the content of the recipe table with the rest of the stakeholder, because another point that I see some weakness is that the one that is writing the recipe table, so the one basically that is in charge of developing the TMF management plan, doesn't agree on the content. So at the end, if someone is really taking care of reading the recipe table, maybe can make some comment review before the finalization. Otherwise, people just see this letter and don't think about that they are responsible for some activity. They are expecting to produce a quality check report, for example. So it's really important to agree between all the stakeholders on the content, and train people on the content if they are not familiar with the recipe table, or if they are unsure about the expectation, especially when there are lots of vendors, a lot of stakeholders. So the clarification of the expectation is fundamental, and this is why we strongly recommend the use of a TMF management plan. Absolutely.
And I got a comment here in the chat from my old pal Nick, and I think it really rings true. So, when we think about, and this is coming from Nick, what Nick says is that it's important to ensure that all understand the difference between responsible and accountable, and this is something that we see over and over and over again. Everybody wants to be accountable, especially senior leadership, and sometimes it's just not. It's not relevant. It's not required. And, not everybody needs to be involved in a RACI chart just because they have a certain job title or they hold a certain position. It really should be dictated and detailed based on your process and what makes most sense from start to finish. Just including someone as accountable or responsible, especially if they're a senior leader with maybe a packed calendar and not much time in their day, can mean that you run into issues where you've created a bottleneck in your process now, where this is something that's going to prevent you from improving it because you've essentially brought in somebody that maybe isn't relevant to be able to be a part of it. So Nick, thank you for that comment. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you.
All right, so let's move on. So now that we've looked at defining accountability and responsibility, we've got to think a little bit about our methodology for metrics, right? So we've talked about what metrics we might want to track, and how they relate to the goals and objectives that we've set. We've started to talk about who's going to be responsible for them. Now we've got to start to pull it all together. When you typically are helping organizations put this methodology in place, what are some of the recommendations that you have, Donatella, when it comes to the frequency and the methodology and how best to structure it?
Yes, so I think that these slides summarize very well our approach. So it's a step-by-step approach, first of all. So we start with the definition of the goals. We start to identify with them the best metrics, and we try to, at the very beginning, if they've never managed metrics, we recommend and we suggest to limit the number of metrics. So it's not, again, don't calculate and measure 21 metrics is not necessary. Start with little pieces. So define maybe one type for completeness, one for quality, and one for timeliness, based on some variable on the company, study specific. And then start to measure them. Obviously, these imply a technology involvement because every TMF system have different feature and functionality to measure the metrics. Some systems don't have lots of functionality, so it's a manual effort. So it depends from technology support that you have, but define how to measure the metrics inside your eTMF, and especially define the frequency. This frequency, okay, here we put monthly basis because we love metrics and we love TMF, so we love to do these things every month, but they can be quarterly, they can be every 6 months. Again, it depends on the goal that you want to achieve. Maybe you've got a specific deadline, a specific timeline to respect. Maybe you need to achieve a better quality percentage by the end of the year. So obviously you need a higher frequency in checking these metrics to evaluate if you're doing wrong or right. Or maybe it's a long process of improvement, and so you want to take it easy, let's say, and do this check every 6 months. So depending again on the goals that you want to achieve, and obviously also on the team, because this is very company specific. We have worked with a company that have a team of TMF management process, so they are dedicated also to the metrics management. In some other company, we saw a very big influence from QA, from the QA department. In other, it's a higher level effort of clinical operation. Sometimes, I would say very often, teams are not so well skilled, not lots of time to dedicate to metrics, but because the company has understood the relevance of the metrics, they ask for outside support. And this is, for example, where we come and we give this kind of external support for the measurement of metrics, because they should become something very routine in your daily business, in your daily TMF process management. But it's easy to understand that if it's the first time that you implement this kind of metric programs and maybe you don't have enough resources, training resources, you can ask, someone else, someone external with major expertise and skill to guide you in this implementation and to guide you to understand the data, because it's really an understanding of the data contained in your TMF. And based on the data, you can then move on. This is why we suggest and recommend a PDCA approach. I mean, this is not a TMF approach. The PDCA approach is a very standard business approach, I would say, and it is plan, do, check, and act. So plan your TMF metrics program. We saw all the steps that are necessary for planning this metrics program. Do your metric program. So putting in concrete, in reality, in practice, what you are planning, measure your metrics, do your reports, and all the stuff. Check the results, because obviously at the end you will have an outcome from this activity. You will have a deliverable, you will have data. So check the data are fine. Are you in compliance? Are you in deviation? Is there any error or issue to fix? Okay, in case, act. So a very important step that majority of the people we saw forget is once you have collected your metrics data, you need to do something. And it can be, majority of the time they are both corrective action plus preventive action. Just to give you a practical example to make you better understand, Oliver, we had at the beginning of this year, it was funny because it was because we had the podcast on Not to File, and it was the measurement of some quality metrics. We realized with this customer that there was a very abuse of Not to File, and so obviously there was this request of reducing the Not to File. So we support them with a corrective action, and the corrective action was try to not delete this Not to File, but try to understand if these Not to File were really relevant or they can be avoided. Try to make people understanding why they didn't use in the proper way the Not to File. The preventive action. So try to avoid this issue in the future was, first of all, the implementation of a training. So we developed a training right for them based on Not to File, but on TMF processes and model in general. And then we did a workshop on Not to File. And we try to also implement some best practice in the work instruction and SOP on TMF management around not to file. So we did, let's say, this kind of double approach: a corrective action, try to fix immediately what was possible to fix, and then a preventive action to avoid the repetition of this data that was not a good data in the future.
All right. We have a question here that I think is a good one to ask. So, do the regulatory authorities ask for TMF metrics for review during an inspection? Is that something that you've seen metrics being reviewed by a GCP inspector, or is it something that's probably larger for the sponsor teams to review?
No, honestly, by my experience, I never saw this kind of request for inspection, but it is, it's the way that you have to succeed the inspection. Because once one of the main aspect that the inspector is going to check is the oversight of your TMF if you are a sponsor and you are sourced the CRO, and the metrics programs plus the metrics checking, regular checking, is a tool that you have to demonstrate your oversight, because maybe you have outsourced also the TMF management process, so you're not going to, indexing, QC, doing all the little step of the process, but you need to ensure the oversight. And that means check the metrics of your TMF and verify where are the gaps and issue, and try to mitigate as soon as possible them. They are not a regulatory requirement, but they are a tool for you to ensure more inspection readiness, because otherwise, especially when you are source, or especially, with TMF, when even if you have an eTMF, it's really challenging to understand how inspection ready is the only way that you have to capture this data from it and try to fix any issue and remediation, and do remediation as soon as possible before the inspection come.
Okay, amazing. So there you go. You have your answer. They shouldn't be reviewed by an inspector, but they are going to help you prepare and have a potentially, hopefully, successful inspection. All right, so last step in the process. So we've, again, as a recap, so we start by setting goals and objectives. We start to then tie specific metrics that are going to help us monitor, measure, and improve those specific goals and objectives. Then we move on to understanding who might be responsible and assigning accountability and responsibility, things like a RACI table. We talk about the methodology and the frequency that we want to focus on reviewing, measuring, and acting on these metrics. And now we've got to start to talk a little bit about the communication side of things. So Donatella, now that we've looked at kind of all of these different pieces, why is communication so important, and what are some of the things that you've seen, or tools that you've used in the past to be able to communicate, a decrease or an increase in metrics, to be able to communicate that to the larger teams?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the last step of the process that you have shared and explained, and because it's the last one, sometimes people forget it. So please don't forget it, because if you've got some metrics, some relevant data, and you don't share this data with the relevant stakeholders, you will not move forward. You will not have an impact on your TMF process. So understand, analyze, get the result, and then communicate. So it's very important to define who is going to get this information. So who is my audience, and what is the final goal that I want to achieve with this communication? Because maybe I am the CPM and I want to transfer the head of clinical operation that the amount of document managed by the CTA is too much. We need to outsource, we need more resources, or maybe I need to transfer the message that our resources are not trained because they are failing too much in the QC, so people need to be retrained on the process. So depending on the message that you want to send, and depending on the target, the final audience you want to achieve, there are different, let's say, tool and way. You can use dashboard, you can use PowerPoint presentation, you can use more written report, very detailed with narrative. Just to give you a couple of examples, we at Services develop two kinds of reports. One is called Oversight and the other is eTMF Health Check Report. Similar in terms of metrics and measurement with the same goal of inspection readiness, but very different in the communication, because one is more PowerPoint, more graphics, design, so very powerful, let's say, and immediate, and is thought, and we saw that is really the fact that is thought for people that, they don't have time to read 30 pages of a report. They just want the data, the color that tells you, yes, you are inspection ready, not, this is the what is missing, these are the data. So something very fast and easy to understand. But health check report, on the other hand, is very useful for QA department, for other department that needs more detail because they need to understand the root cause of something that went wrong in the process. So it's a different approach. It's a different way of communication for different audience, for different objectives. So once you have defined and you've got your data, don't forget to communicate, because communication is really important to do something with the data. You have the power to collect this data for your TMF, do something with this data, communicate them, try to improve the process, correct any issue and fix an issue, and be more inspection ready.
And I guess that also gives you the opportunity to think about, if you've defined maybe some standard formats or themes to be able to communicate some of these metrics, whether it be presentations or reports, that's also an important step if you need to escalate. If there's an issue, something that needs to be addressed immediately, to be able to do that, you need to have at least a process to be able to say, okay, well, when this happens, when we see this dip below this level, or when we see this number hit this level, what is the process for being able to escalate that so that we can build a plan to remediate the issue or, make a decision on what we're going to do next?
Exactly. Remember that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So if you don't document the metrics that you have measured and the data, nobody will know that and nothing will be done. So absolutely agree, Oliver. Yeah. Oh, yes. Here, I really love this slide because, I think that we love this exercise as Montrium of the start, stop, and continue. But I want to hear your voice, Oliver, about that. So in terms of TMF metrics, what do you recommend in terms of start, stop, and continue to do?
Okay, this is an easy one, I think, for us over here at Montrium. I think there's some obvious stuff. I think I would go back and forth on a couple different things that I would start to do, but I think if I was to synthesize into one thing that I would start doing when it comes to TMF metrics, is using your TMF or managing your TMF in an active way. This is the only way that you're going to get better insights and drive metrics. Which means that the stop is actually to stop using your TMF as just a repository or as an archive. This is only going to make inspections that much more painful. We need to evolve out of this archivist mindset. TMFers on the line, if someone says that you're an archivist, tell them you are not, because that is not your job. We need to think about the TMF as this wealth of data and information that can help us make better decisions. But if we only use it as an end state, a place that we place documentation, we're never going to get information that we can use to drive these metrics that can ultimately help us improve. And then continue, I would say, at any point in time, we always have to be focusing on continuing to improve our processes. Never think your process is complete and the most perfect sort of organization it can be. And of course, metrics are going to be able to help you identify those areas of improvement over time. So I guess continue trying to think about, I need to always look at improving my process, and metrics are going to help me do that to understand and evaluate areas where I can improve. So there you go. Start using your TMF in an active way. Absolutely stop using your TMF as an archive, and continue to improve your processes. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the State of TMF. a live event and podcast brought to you by Montrium, the leaders in clinical, quality, and regulatory solutions for scaling life science organizations. Wherever you've listened or watched, please like and subscribe, and head over to Montrium's LinkedIn page for more great content. We'll see you next time.